Little bit of Q&A. People ask this question all the time, and I think it's a great question. And so I'll answer it now. This is, if I had to choose between sugar and seed oils, what would I pick? And of course, I'm always talking about we want to minimize sugar content, especially for the kids. Sugar is in everything. If it doesn't contain sugar, it most likely in this day and age turns straight to sugar, blah, blah, blah. But hands down, I would go sugar any day over the seed oils because sugar at least leaves your system. You have a little bit of an insulin surge. And at the end of it, it's going to slowly be metabolized. It could be stored as fat, but for the most part, the sugar leaves your system. Of course, you want to do foods that contain more natural sugars, like like your dates and your fruit-based things. Maybe a little bit of, if you're going to do a non-caloric sweetener, like a stevia in small amounts, or monk fruit in really small amounts. Raw honey, molasses. I think I mentioned dates. All of that stuff is going to definitely make a difference. But from the metabolizing standpoint, it is, sugar definitely is sugar. However, seed oils, the half-life, much longer. It's actually years, months, coming out with a book on this. Actually, the book might be out, is laced, as all his books are, laced with references. And we'll be talking about those things more. And I will come on and talk about the oils more, which oils, which I've definitely done before. Talked about which particular oils you want to be focusing on getting in, right? Let's not focus so much about what do we need to take away. Let's think about what we can add in. Your grass-fed butters, your coconut oils, your olive oils, your ghees, your tallows. What else am I forgetting? Avocado, right? Those with higher smoke points, less chance of oxidation. We don't, in restaurants, they're reusing oil over and over and over and over, and like 99% of the oils are going to be oxidized. So you just want to limit eating out. You can take phospholipids, you can take digestive enzymes. Those two things will help. I've talked about that before. But between sugar and seed oils, I would say absolutely sugar, hands down. When we're talking about things like chronic disease and what is making that list, because of course it's not just one thing that's causing chronic disease to go up in all ages. Just going off of this idea of seed oils replacing almost entirely, especially with things like packaged foods, replacing the saturated fats. So this is an interesting paper from 2023. This idea from the 1950s that was out, and then there was that bigger study that happened that was, as we all know, very, very weak evidence. In 1961, the American Heart Association gave the advice to limit the saturated fat, and it's basically been 90%. Americans increased their consumption by 90% from 1970 to 2014. I think this is really not something that we can ignore anymore. It's this just blazing light in front of all of us, and we just cannot ignore it anymore. This linoleic acid, that's in the vegetable and seed oils that I was just talking about. This is in almost everything we consume, you guys. It's in almost everything we consume. Of course, there's lots of politics and bureaucracy, like anything involved with this specific subject, as the American Heart Association had been receiving money from Procter & Gamble, who are the makers of Crisco. How nice. But I look at some of the studies that some of these like RDs and scientists now are promoting, because now there's this whole movement of nutrition professionals coming on and talking about how people who are trying to tell you to avoid things like seed oils and high fructose corn syrup and all the junk that we're consuming, those of us who are saying we may want to limit these or try our best to choose different products, now that's fear mongering. So these are like some of the studies that they're coming out with. So I just want to show you guys an example of one of these things. I just did the little deep dive here. So biomarkers of dietary. So this is so they're trying to prove that omega-6 fats, actually this linoleic acid, which is metabolizes to arachidonic acid, that's actually really good for the heart, right? So they're looking at They were not associated with cardiovascular incomes. But then again, you know, you look at the disclosures of all these doctors. Doctors Wu and Micah report research support for, and then it goes on and on. It talks about how basically they work for the NIH and the Gates Foundation. You haven't been living under a rock, you know that there's a very strong incentive for them, a very clear agenda, guys, about to keep us away from consuming the animal products and the saturated fats and into all of the plant-based, right? The plant-based used to have a really, really good meaning. Add that to the list of the phrases that no longer, there's a lot more weight, tied to that phrase than there used to be. What else do we have? And then we have one of the authors on the steering committee of the Yale Open Data Access Project funded by Johnson & Johnson. These things make my eyebrows go, squint, squint, squint. It is, and I recommend you do this with every paper that you see. Now, having said all this, we know that we do need some omega-6 fats. So that's not what we're saying. We're not saying, but the thing of it is that nowadays you really, unless you're like eating carrots from your farm raw, and that's like all you're consuming, there's no way to avoid them. There's no way to avoid them. So again, I will repeat, if we aim here, we will always fall to here. But if you're not paying attention at all, there could be some problems. This is not something we can avoid anymore. I'm talking about, avoiding looking into this is what I mean. This paper goes on to talk about these vegetarian activist groups and, just the things that we want to be paying attention to. Again, all of that stuff meant something very different decades ago than what it means now. And so this is not to say that no one can be a vegetarian, but what I'm saying is it's much more difficult nowadays to healthfully be a vegetarian than it was, and especially a vegan, because of A, what they're doing to the food, and B, the lack of micronutrients that is in the soil that is used to grow the fruits and vegetables. So it's like that. It's a double whammy. So I am by no means villainizing omega-6 fats, but what I want you guys to really understand, really, it's just breaking it down to the common sense part. So thinking of something like animal fat, so something like butter, or lard or tallow or something, or a saturated fat like coconut oil, your body understands what that looks like molecularly, knows how to metabolize it, versus something that in some cases really is closer to a molecule of plastic with some of these omega-6 fats that are happening, being produced in factories and laboratories. Your body's like, what's happening? And then it's just kind of sticking around in the body much longer than it needs to. It's oxidized in many cases. So this is the other thing. So when we're looking at something like a pure sunflower oil, and a lot of these ingredients are in some of the phospholipids that we sell as supplements, right? But it's the idea of what happens to these things when they're oxidized. And that is what we're consuming, in all of the packaged foods. So something to really pay attention to, not about villainizing omega-6 fats. All right.